Today, we're going to tackle what may be Pokemon's most well-known and most contentious controversy. It all started at 2019 Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3, where, during a presentation all about the first mainline game on the Nintendo Switch, no, the Let's Go games do not count, it was revealed that not every Pokemon would be in the game. This was the first time ever that a mainline Pokemon game simply did not have the ability to hold certain Pokemon. Before this, even if a Pokemon wasn't catchable in a game, you could still trade the Pokemon in as long as the Pokemon existed when the game came out. And of course, people were upset, to say the least. This started to be called Dexit, and if you were on the internet at the time, it was inescapable. Basically, everyone thought this was a terrible idea.
Ew! Dude! What the f?
A phrase you often hear is that every Pokemon is someone's favorite, and with the game's theme of partnership and bonding with your Pokemon, it must feel really bad to start your journey and look for your little buddy only to find out he's just not there. Personally, I love Psyduck, and he wasn't included in the base game of Pokemon Sword and Shield, so I had to go through my adventure and beat Leon without my little yellow duck, who'd be my Pikachu basically if I was in the anime. Now, I'm a competitive player, and I like really bad Pokemon like Psyduck and Mime Jr., so I made peace with the fact that I wouldn't be winning with my favorites a long time ago. But that isn't the case for everyone. For some people, Pokemon is a game that they play every 3 to 4 years when the new one comes out, where they just kind of play with their old favorites and maybe make 1 or 2 new ones from the new Pokemon in each game. And thanks to Dexit, sometimes your old favorites are missing. Like, imagine if Ash just wasn't allowed to use Pikachu when he went to the Galar region for the first time. So, was Dexit the end of Pokemon, like people on the internet thought it would be? Well, considering it was introduced in Generation 8 and we're on Generation 9, obviously not. And the Pokemon games that have come out since Dexit, Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet, are the second and third best-selling Pokemon game generations ever, only behind the original Red and Blue. So, like I said, the initial announcement was in 2019. 2019 was 5 years ago. So, what's happened since then? Well, the typical Pokemon fan, honestly, still probably isn't a fan of Dexit. But as I've alluded to, and you've probably guessed from literally everything about this channel, here we care about official competitive Pokemon first and foremost. So today, we're gonna look at how competitive Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet has looked, how Dexit has informed that, and if we're better off this way. But first, your career might be better off with the sponsor of today's video, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is an online course meant to teach you all about back-end development, and it's designed to tackle what is by far the most difficult part of online learning, the soul-crushing boredom. Boot.dev has taken tactics from modern game design to make it compelling and fun to learn how to program in Python and Go from start to finish. With their gamified courses, centered around tons of hands-on experience actually writing code, you'll feel less like you're taking a class and more like you're playing an RPG. But instead of a Pokemon or some guy with spiky anime hair getting experience, it's you! And since Boot.dev is all online, you can start and stop whenever you want and go at your own pace. Boot.dev understands that not everyone can afford a membership, so they very generously offer every single one of their courses for absolutely free. All of the written and video instruction is always available in guest mode, but a membership does give you access to some great benefits like hands-on practice, AI assistance, and all the gamification features we've talked about so far. And if you do buy a membership and decide it's not for you, they offer a 30 days, no questions asked refund. Click the link in the description and use my code SCRAW to get 25% off your first month, or your whole first year if you purchase the annual plan, and learn some programming skills with Boot.dev today. Now, back to the video. Going in chronological order, regulations A through C of Scarlet and Violet are what we would call regional Dex formats, meaning that the only Pokemon that are legal are Pokemon you can actually catch in the base game itself and are included in the Paldea Pokédex. With the exception of Miraidon and Koraidon, every one of these Paldea Pokemon were legal by Regulation C. Formats like this are the closest we have to something like a Dexited format to look at historically, because of course, not every Pokemon is around in every region's base Pokédex. As such, these have been the only really curated formats that have existed. Theoretically, Game Freak has the ability to sculpt the regional Pokédex in a way that makes the early seasons of a game's competitive life cycle a lot of fun. And they don't need to warp the whole Pokédex to do this either. I mean, keeping Skiploom in's not gonna hurt anything. They can just pick and prune a few overtuned outliers. Like if, for example, if they really wanted Toedscruel to do well in competitive in Scarlet and Violet because they knew it would be a popular new Pokemon, they could have cut Amoonguss from the Dex. Or if they have an idea for a cool gimmick Pokemon that has the potential to be a little too strong, they can ensure there's readily accessible counterplay to it, like all the different Haze and Clear Smog options that existed in the Paldea Pokédex to try to handle Dondozo, who would have overrun the format on pure stats alone otherwise, though some might argue it still kinda did, at least till Paradoxes came along. And not for nothing, these regional Pokédex formats are often by far the most popular, because it allows people to use some pretty odd Pokemon that you wouldn't expect otherwise, like how Dreadnought in the top 8 of the first Scarlet and Violet region.
Oh, no way!
Would you
we actually
believe
get
it?
the Dreadnought. Okay.
It does connect! And it gets the KO!
No way! Dreadnought putting in so
But of course, at some point in the game's lifecycle, things change, and Game Freak will start to allow Pokemon that aren't available in the native Pokedex. We call these types of formats National Dex formats, and importantly, Game Freak almost never bans individual Pokemon from these events. Instead, they tend to ban Pokemon by category, such as how in Regulation F, everything was legal for competitive play except for the powerful restricted Pokemon like Kyogre and Calyrex. From Regulation D onward in Scarlet and Violet, select Pokemon from Pokemon Home, like Landorus and Urshifu, became legal in the game, despite at the time there being no legitimate way to obtain them in Scarlet and Violet. While in other Pokemon games, when this started, the floodgates would be completely opened, it wasn't the case this time around. Certain Pokemon that would be in a similar category to Urshifu or Landorus, like the Ultra Beasts and the Tapus, weren't in the game, strangely enough. Without access to these Pokemon, things were different than they would have been otherwise, go figure. A very felt absence, one that basically everyone who played Regulation D onwards felt would have been good for the game, was Tapu Fini. As a bulky fairy and water type, Tapu Fini is uniquely strong against both of the Urshifu forms. And if you didn't know it, Urshifu is an extremely powerful, extremely unfun Pokemon. If Tapu Fini had been around, Urshifu would still have been very good, he's just kind of a broken Pokemon, but it would have had a natural check that people wanted to run. And Tapu Fini would have also served as a pretty decent deterrent to Amoonguss, because by setting up Misty Terrain, you would make all Pokemon that touch the ground immune to status moves, so no Sleep Room Spore. So in this instance, it seems like plucking one Pokemon out was a bad thing, and perpetuated some of the less healthy Pokemon of the format. But Dexiting isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a very good thing. The obvious example is that if Shninja was legal in Scarlet and Violet, its ability Wonder Guard would become oppressively powerful in a way that's really unfun. Because Wonder Guard says you can only be damaged by super effective moves, Shninja could terrestrialize into a type with only a few weaknesses, like normal or electric, or it can even become completely immune to direct attacks by being electric with an air balloon. Another one is, of course, Xerneas and Yveltal, who may have been too unhealthy in Scarlet and Violet since you'd be able to really easily stack their auras and the terrestrialization boost for gigantic fairy and dark type damage. I made a whole video about this one where I also accidentally predicted Legend ZA, but anyway, it's clear that removing Pokemon that would have been in a format can be a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on the context. So for competitive play, if Dexit as a tool is used well, it can be a good thing, right? Well, yeah, it can be, but it begs the question, why do we need to remove Pokemon from the game entirely just so that they won't be legal for competitive play? It seems like a really broad tool that, at least as far as I can tell, is only actively useful for a very small subsection of players. But it seems to be the only tool we have. For some reason, Game Freak is very cautious about banning individual Pokemon from competitive play, instead opting to do it by category. The frustrating thing here is, I can't really say why they're so afraid to ban Pokemon individually. Maybe the argument is like, oh, it makes the game easier to follow for casual fans, just because they know what is legal and what isn't, so they can go, oh, in this tournament, legendary Pokemon are allowed, but in this one they aren't. As opposed to saying, well, legendary Pokemon are legal, but for some reason, Urshifu is banned, and Tapu Bulu is banned, and it could be confusing, sure. So instead, I guess they'd rather say, you know, all sub-legendary Pokemon are legal, with the understanding that if the Pokemon's not in the game, obviously you can't use it. But this, of course, raises a lot of problems. Number one, it kind of creates dead hand control. Once the last content update for a Pokemon game is done, the pool of available Pokemon will be frozen. And if a problematic Pokemon that should have been Dexited slipped through the cracks, he just kind of lasts there until the next generation, where thereupon, maybe Game Freak learns from their mistakes and takes the Pokemon out. But for some contextual reason, maybe that particular game's generational gimmick would have turned our hypothetical Dexited Pokemon into a worthwhile and fun addition to the metagame, as opposed to a problem. So what do I think? Well, I think you should subscribe. I don't normally do subscription plugs, but I've heard they help out, and I like when the number goes up. It tickles my brain. So if you like what I do here, subscribe. Anyway, what I actually think, well, first of all, I don't think Dexit was actually meant as a tool for competitive Pokemon balancing, let's be clear, but it very clearly can be used as one. And with Pokemon tournaments getting more and more popular, Game Freak should pay attention to what Pokemon makes competitive healthy and fun, or oppressive and boring. And they should use the tools they have to try to help make formats more fun and more enjoyable. But second off, it is objectively the case that the Pokemon Company has access to ways to adjust competitive Pokemon without removing Pokemon entirely from the game. We've had a ranked season where Game Freak specifically flagged Pokemon, not based on category, but just on usage, and made it illegal to use them on the ladder. But for some reason, they just don't seem willing to do that again, or at a larger scale where it might affect an in-person tournament. So, is Dexit a good thing? For the franchise as a whole, and especially the casual player, no, it objectively isn't. However, if I had to choose between Dexit existing and there being no way for the Pokemon Company to make problematic Pokemon unusable in competitive play without banning entire swaths of Pokemon, I'd choose the Pokedex cut. But it really shouldn't be a choice we have to make. Game Freak, you have one of the most popular media franchises ever. If you want Pokemon to take your game seriously as a competitive outlet, you have to realize that other games do the whole monthly balancing thing on purpose, and maybe you should do it too. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. Thanks for watching, bye.